I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for joining me for Opus 255 of the podcast built to decolonize classical music. I want to wish everybody a happy Women's History Month. We should be celebrating the achievements and contributions of women year-round, of course, but I think it's nice to focus on it just as we do for Black History Month. So happy Women's History Month. I'm going to shout out Melanie Dodson, who hosts the morning classical radio show down in Knoxville, Tennessee. She actually put me on to Women's History Month when we were working together there at WUOT about a decade ago. And she's had a huge impact on the way I program and present in March and overall with a focus on women. Even these days in my work with the American Composers Orchestra, really closing that gender gap has become a primary part of my work. So shout out to Melanie and everyone down there at WUOT. Really appreciate how Women's History Month has expanded my perspectives and my engagement of music over the years. For this month of Women's History Month, I have some dialogues coming up for you in celebration of a few classical women. Next week, you'll hear, or so-called classical women. Next week, you'll hear from a conductor who led an orchestral celebration of Whitney Houston here in New York not too long ago. I also have a feature on a French composer named Fernand de Crook coming up in a couple weeks. And I've even got a chat scheduled with Erilyn Wallen from England for later in March. So lots coming up. But for today's TRILLOQUY, I'm going to shout out Protestra and some of the thoughts that their recent concert inspired in me. That's for the end of this opus. But for right now, I'd like to introduce to you today's guests. It's a double feature today with composer Ron Ramin and librettist Portia Kamons. Portia is a celebrated writer and theater producer with many, many awards under her belt. And Ron is a composer who's been working for television for many years as a composer. He's written music for more than 250 hours of U.S. network television, so you've probably heard the work of Ron Ramin here or there. Well, these two came together last year to create a project with the Orlando Philharmonic called 17. I'll read from the official description on their website. It says, created by composer Ron Ramin and librettist producer Portia Kamons, 17 conveys the recent experiences of young Americans as they confront an unprecedented range of challenges from gun violence to climate change and offers a glimpse of what it means to be on the cusp of adulthood in America today. For people on the cusp of adulthood, I'm here to tell you it's crazy over here. So just be prepared. Anyway, people are always talking about how to get the youth engaged and involved in classical music. And this project did just that. Portia, Ron, and myself talk about the development of 17. We talk about their personal trajectories and also what the survival of orchestral mediums and broader art forms requires for the future. That and lots more. So huge shout out to both Portia and Ron for taking the time to join me here on the TRILLOQUY podcast. To get us there, I'd like to share a little of the audio that went along with the promo for this project. The Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra is featured here in this musicking. Hope you enjoy my chat with Portia Kamons and Ron Ramin.
17. Let's talk. I'm sure there's a lot.
Well, I think what makes 17 unique is that it's sort of we think of it as a triangular piece where each piece of it is integral. The music, the libretto, and the engagement. And they're sort of baked into the whole experience of 17. And the young people that we interviewed for the piece in Orlando and anywhere where we do 17 can come to any city that is showing the piece, and they can participate in engagement programs in schools and talk directly to students about their experiences, about working on this piece, about what brought them into the world of activism that the piece explores. And young people can engage directly with their peers, and that's been so far a hugely powerful and very rewarding part of this project.
What would you add to that, Ron?
Well, I would say that, when you look at traditional outreach, what has gone on, I mean, what we're doing, it's not really an embracing or rejection of these very well-intentioned efforts. Um, but I think it's important for classical music to be relevant for them, that you have to speak to what their concerns are. What is in it for them if they go to the concert hall? And young people, they're not allergic to orchestras. They'll fill up a hall if it's video game music. They'll fill up a hall if it's John Williams film music. But somehow they don't necessarily want to go hear Brahms Fourth. I love Brahms Fourth, but that's not what is going to get them in there. But if you write a piece that makes them feel like, well, this is for me. This is addressing my needs. It makes me think about my life. Music is very powerful, and you can say things using music that maybe you can't verbalize. And so our attempt was to reach them using their words. This piece, I mean, not to sound selfless, but 17 is not about Portia and it's not about me. This is not Ron Ramin's violin concerto, or it's not a poem Portia wrote about young people. This is all in their words, and the words always have to take precedence.
I
Their
wonder I wonder what's at stake here. What happens if our industry can't engage Gen Z? Does the future of the orchestral experience really rely on this sort of engagement from your perspectives? Maybe I'll start with you, Ron.
Well, I wouldn't just put it on Gen Z. I think this has been a problem for a while. I was lucky. I was privileged. My parents took me to concerts. That was part of what I did. My father took me to baseball games, but he took me to concerts. I saw he loved baseball. He loved concerts. I sort of, that affected me. And I think that when I became a father and I looked at my my son's friends, they didn't go to the concert hall. They weren't taken to plays. And I'm not talking about spending a lot of money in a play. It could be a local production.
Hmm.
It was not something they were introduced to. I mean, they would take them to the beach. They would, again, take them to a baseball game, but not to concerts. And so they, I think, have a little more of a task in front of them because they didn't have that tradition that maybe those of us who were a little older or our parents took us places had. And I do think it's really it's not just on Gen Z. And how do we get them there? I think you get them there by making them feel that there is a piece of music that speaks to their concerns about their future, about their lives, and not being talked down to by older people like me.
Hmm. Portia, I'll ask you the same question and sort of add a level to it. I think we often think about engaging the next generation of musicians, maybe even the next generation of patrons, but we don't always talk about engaging the next generation of funders, the next generation of
Uh,
board members, all of
right,
all of
right,
these other people that we need. I
right.
wonder what your thoughts are there.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. We've been talking about this uh, in with Ron and I just today that, I think that this rising generation, because of their exposure to being creative on social media and the agency they have in their own platforms, there is a respect for the art of making something and making it really great, even if it's a TikTok, like great. And I also, in my experience with dealing with the young people that we met with 17, they had incredible enthusiasm for orchestral music. That was a big surprise for me. In fact, there is a wonderful young woman from Braddock, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh, who said to me, Yo-Yo Ma got me addicted to classical music when he came to play a private event for victims of gun violence in her community. And a really powerful thing. So I didn't have to convince them that classical music was for them or could be interesting for them. They're open and willing. And I think there will be those who want to be on the creative side, and there will be those who just want to be on the receiving end, and then there will be those who end up being the leaders who will understand that this requires funding. It's a really tricky thing. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think there will be people who emerge from their generation who recognize the great value in collective experience in the same IRL space, and to know that those are places that they need to actually start to lead and to maintain. I really imagine that they'll find new ways of doing it that might be better than we have in the past, maybe less fantastically expensive physical spaces and more creative. I mean, I've done a lot of site-specific theater in my day. I can't quite imagine site-specific symphonic play, but who knows? Maybe in the virtual space. I don't know, but I do think they will come with their own ideas and change things because it needs a lot of innovation to survive.
Indeed, indeed.
Hmm.
I definitely want to circle back to 17, but I want to give everyone a little bit of context on who the two of you are as artists and as humans. The first thing that came to mind for me was personal experience when it comes to being engaged as a younger person into the arts. For me, I remember, when I was, I believe in first or second grade, the movie Disney's Aladdin came out. And for some reason, it just really intrigued me. Not long after that, as a little kid, we took a field trip to see the Nutcracker, and the Arabian scene, obviously,
Right.
so really grabbed my attention. And long story short, I became a bassoonist later down the line.
I see it in the background there. I was
I
going to
have
say,
I have different feelings about Nutcracker now, having performed it so much, but
right.
but
I'm sure.
it was definitely my hook. So Portia, I suppose maybe on the literary side, what was your hook? How are you engaged
It's
as a
so
young?
funny that you asked that because I grew up in weirdly, and it doesn't really matter why, but I grew up in a really rural, tiny town of 350 people in southwestern Pennsylvania. And there was nothing, no live art, nothing like that there. But I recently reconnected with my best friend from when I was 5 years old, whose name is Jessica, and her father was a local preacher, and he taught us how to play Blowin' in the Wind on the guitar.
Hmm.
And we won this little talent show that they had there. And she sent me a picture of me as a 5 year old on this really kind of pathetic stage with like deflating balloons on it, holding my $1 bill that we won in this singing Blowing in the Wind. And I wrote her back when she sent me this picture. That was the beginning of my creative career right then in Markleysburg, PA, in the
Oh,
Mark Clay Elementary talent show. And I'm not kidding. I really think it was. I loved making music as a kid. I'm not saying I had any skill at it, but it was, early on, someone put an instrument in my hand and let me play. I went a different direction. I went to Carnegie Mellon, I studied theater, and then I moved to New York and I became a producer. And in a lot of my theatrical producing has been, as I said, site-specific theater that's been done outside and I mean, we would charge tickets, but anybody could come. You can't prevent, in fact, it's part of the joy of that kind of work to have people from the local community seeing something happening and wondering what's this and why. And my answer to that was always come in, why not. And it's a joyous part of it. And anyway, I've sort of lost what the beginning of the question
I mean, so
was.
so
How
so
do we
many,
get there?
so many of us, it takes years for us to get our first paid gig, and just from the start,
Oh.
you were already there.
Yeah, and I'm probably still earning the same hourly rate as I
What about
was.
you, Ron? What's your origin story?
Well, I grew up in the tiny town of New York City. We couldn't have been brought up in different environments. And my father was a musician. He worked on Broadway, he worked in movies. So I grew up in a household where there was always music. And for me, it could have been listening to the Beatles or Bela Bartok
Hmm.
or Duke Ellington. I mean, it was just all music all the time. And so for me, going into music was almost going into the family business.
Oh, wow.
Uh, I saw what attracted me to music was watching his love for it. And it was something that no matter what else I thought I might want to do, and I thought of maybe, international relations or being a lawyer or something, I couldn't escape the fact that music was my first love. So I went to college, I went to Princeton, and then I decided I want to be a film composer. So I moved to Los Angeles, and I was very fortunate in that I was able to do a lot of work in primetime television and movies and miniseries and stuff. So and I entered at sort of the tail end of the the old way of doing things. You weren't working with QuickTime files. You were working with film. You were working with, feet and sprockets, and you had to learn how to conduct with streamers and in a studio. I mean, it was like, the real thing, the old Hollywood. And of course, things changed. And then everybody started using samples, and I did too, and synths. But at some point, I kind of got the bug to return to, go doing something for the concert hall. It's very different. When you write music for films, you must put the film first. It's
Hmm.
not about you. And that's something for an only child to say it's not about you. That's really something. It is about the film. And but this was different. And you could really say something very personal in your music. You know this as somebody who lives in that environment. Um, I was really very, very happy to go back to that world where you could really say something that means something to you. Now, 17 is a little different because it's almost a hybrid because the words do come first in this.
Hmm.
So all of those years of scoring for television and for films where you have to think about what can you do to, to make sure that you're not losing sight of what is being said, but you complement it in some way, I think really helped me a lot when it came to the structure of 17.
I wonder why, and I can pose this to both of you. We have film music, we have video game music, we have television, we have movies, all of these ways in which the art has evolved and fit into different sort of structures in this 21st century. Why is the live experience, in your opinions, still important or still a vital part of this industry? I mean, again, I can always, hear some great music by watching a movie. Um, yeah, maybe I'll start with you, Ron. Why is just the concert hall experience specifically something that you think is still a vital part of what we do?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's funny because I talk with my wife about this, and we say, well, should we go to the movie and be around other people, or should we stay at home and stream something?
Mhm.
It's not the same experience. It's a communal experience. You walk into a concert hall and you see the musicians and you see the way that they connect with each other. And when you're sitting next to people, even if you don't know them, and you see how they react to the music, there's nothing quite like it. It's not the same thing. I think part of I mean, technology is a blessing and a curse in my opinion. I mean, it is a way for people to connect to the world, but I think you lose something very personal
Mm.
and you lose that sense of community. And so whenever I go to a concert hall, I have to remind myself, wow, this is so much more powerful than listening to something on Spotify or on Apple Music. I mean, yes, the recording is great. I can maybe hear it more clearly, but there's nothing like being there in person.
People love a sense of going out, they want to go out, they want to be seen, they want to put on, their finest or whatever and be with their friends or meet new people and to have the rush and the fizz of a genuine live experience. It makes you feel in your bones. As a like an example of this, when we were in Orlando, when we introduced the six narrators who were performing 17 to the seven young people who came to Orlando who we interviewed, and we were all meeting for the first time, so it was all very exciting, and we had plans to take everybody out for dinner and to meet some of the other people involved in the company. When Eric Jacobson invited them to stay to hear a rehearsal of Bernstein's symphonic dances.
Mm.
And, we sat in like a 3,000 seat auditorium, just us. And do you remember that old sort of Memorex commercial where the speakers go on and the hair goes back?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like that with everybody. Everybody was like, whoa, like buckle up. And it was so amazing to see. I mean, all of us, none of us were spared it because what an incredible piece of music that is. I mean, even if I hadn't heard it live, maybe ever, I hadn't heard it for a very long time. Ron knows the piece incredibly well, and Jamie Bernstein was with us.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was all like, whew. And the electricity there was something really genuinely unforgettable.
Yeah,
And
they
that's the
said,
kind of
do
stuff
we
that
have to
happens.
eat? Can't we just stay? Got to drag them out.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
That's
great.
phenomenal. So certainly a favorite of mine. Portia, you mentioned Eric Jacobson, circling back to 17, he was quoted as saying 17 is about giving voice to the next generation. And when I read that quote, there's several things that went through my mind. I thought about how YouTubers have become rich, creating media in their own way. We have TikTok. We even have today, at least, a United States Congressman, Maxwell Frost, who is a Gen Z
Yes,
participant who's all the way in the government. All of that
from
to
Orlando.
indeed, yes,
Yeah.
all of that to say, Gen Z does have a voice, certainly a creative voice, but not necessarily in the concert hall specifically or in the fine arts specifically. I wonder, I'll start with you, Portia. I wonder what you see as the gap between what young people are able to create digitally versus what they're able to create in more quote unquote traditional spaces.
I mean, I think the digital native vibe that they bring to their social media is actually sometimes it's annoying, but really it's fun. And I love it as a point of creative expression for them. And to see how fluid and fluent so many of them are in creating this stuff is really, impressive, can be. But I imagine that as they get older and they find their people, the people they want to collaborate with, the people they will allow to push them to really get into the deep stuff when they have something to say beyond, trying to get enough clicks to like maybe make some money, to when they come to the point where they have something to say and there's a lot to inspire them to think seriously about that. It's everywhere around them. I mean, uh, Kendrick, Pulitzer Prize winning poet and music maker, an impactful person. A lot of people look at that and think, wow, I would love to do that. So for those who do get inspired and figure out a way to learn how to do this, whether they're trained classically or in a conservatory or they just come to it themselves, I think when they really start taking on big challenges of what it is they want to say in a big way on a big stage, they'll do it. They'll create that bridge. I just hope that we're ready for them when they come.
What do you think, Ron? The space between digital creation and IRL creation.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, again, I think you know, sometimes it takes time to get your footing.
Hmm.
And I think it's asking a lot of young people to expect them to always find their voice at a certain age. It takes seasoning. It takes time. So I agree with Portia on that. I mean, we'll see eventually who they collaborate with, what it is. I've always been interested when I used to read reviews of concerts, and there'd be, let's say, a young pianist, and the reviewer would say, well, that was a really interesting performance. I can't wait to see what he'll do in 20 years.
Mm.
Because people's interpretation changes. Talk about Leonard Bernstein. You listen to how he conducted later in life the same piece when he was a young Turk, you wouldn't know it's the same conductor.
Hmm.
So it's evolving, and what they do. Listen, as a composer, you're aware. I used to use pencil and paper, and you have to wean yourself away from that, and you start using all kinds of programs like Logic, and or GarageBand or whatever you happen to use. So all the tools are there, but what are you going to do with those tools? Are you, yeah, and that just takes a little bit of time. Takes time to find really what you want to say. So we shall see. It's an unanswered question.
Indeed, indeed. Well, earlier, the two of you mentioned that for 17, the narrative, the words came first. So, Portia, I wonder if you can sort of talk about the process of collecting these narratives. What were those initial dialogues like, and how did you decide what to include and maybe what not to include?
I mean, that last bit that you've just said was by far for me the hardest part of this process because there was so much and really, synthesizing from the 800 pages of text that I had in the end to find the kind of poetry that was in there the whole time was the great challenge of this piece. But meeting the kids, I shouldn't call them kids because very few of them are still minors now, but they're these amazing young people who were, as Michelle, do something. They were doing something from a very young age. The youngest was 13, and I think the oldest was 23 when I started. And I just want to say, as a way into this, that before I met Ron, I'd been working on a piece that was premiered at BAM in New York, called Bass Track, and it was a verbatim theater piece about Marines who were returning to the U.S. after the Gulf Wars and the challenges they were facing in dealing with their mental health. And it was a really powerful, impactful piece, entirely verbatim text. Everybody working on that piece knew nothing about the US military, not a thing. So we had nothing to bring to it except the capacity to be able to relay a story as we gathered it. And I learned a huge amount from that process, and I applied the same techniques to 17. Ron and I together built an advisory council of people in all different walks of activism and the arts, and they advised us all along the way, and in several cases introduced us to people. One of the women who organized the Women's March introduced us to someone. This person introduced us to a wonderful guy in Chicago named Kofi Ademola, and he introduced us to this wonderful woman named Camilla Williams, and her son Jeremiah was the 13-year-old. And it took time to build trust, and I would have Zoom calls with the young people and get permission from their parents and all that sort of stuff. And over time, the calls started to be a bit longer, and eventually, I had a list of questions that I asked all of them so I could get something of a similar answer. I mean, some of it was really basic, like what are your favorite things to have for breakfast, or your top 5 songs that you're listening to right now, that sort of thing. So I had some data sets that were comparable. But really, I just got them to talk and tell their stories. And then it took a long time to really synthesize from the great overall, what were the common themes and the glue that was really holding them together generationally. And it was, once we made those hard decisions, Ron and I worked together to shape a 4 movement story that reflected all these experiences. And so much so that by the end, they were so blended together that unless it was something really specific, like a reference to where they lived or the dog they had as a child or something really very specific, you might not know which person was which, because the themes really emerged as universal things they shared.
That's beautiful, especially the rapport building,
Oh, yeah.
over generations. I think that's really phenomenal. Ron, earlier you talked about the when you're scoring for film, It's all about the movie. Was it the same for these narratives when the libretto was finally finalized? Did you approach it in a way that you would approach maybe writing for an opera? Was it different? I wonder if you can speak to that.
Well, actually, it had a lot more in common with my career as a film composer than I had imagined.
Hmm.
I joked with Portia. I said, your job in this project is really front loaded. You have to do the heavy lifting at the beginning. You are spending hours upon hours building the trust with these young people, with putting together a story. I outside of a small part of the third movement that I wrote actually, prior to this, that was my homage to the 17 who lost their lives at Parkland at the shooting. Everything was written after I had the words, because it was really important for me to to build it based on the words. And when I say the words come first, I really mean it. I was able to pick my spots where there was just music, and I was and what was really interesting was Portia would give me. It was sort of like a lyricist giving the composer. The lyrics come first, then the music. They always joke about, when Richard Rodgers wrote with Loren's Heart, the music came first. But when Hammerstein, it was the reverse. For me, I had to see what was being said. And then I would write something and we discuss it. And eventually, what was a three movement work became a four movement work because we just had to figure out how to shape this thing. And it's really fun having a collaborator if it's a good collaborator.
Hmm. Absolutely.
It really is. It's like having siblings that you get along with as opposed to those you say, oh well, not not really for me. So
Right.
it worked out great for us. We sort of stayed out of each other's way to some degree in that she came up with this. There were very, very little, minor things that I said, do you think you might tweak this a little bit? Or can I have a little more space here
Oh,
between
that's
lines? Um,
valuable.
when you talk about the similarities, I can't imagine as a composer, when you're dealing with a locked piece of film, you go back and you say to the film editor, can you re-edit that film? Because I need 4 more seconds for the musical transition. They would laugh at you.
Hmm.
This is because they say, "Are you kidding me? This is what you have to deal with." But in this, there was a lot of give and take, and you have to have trust in your partner that they're not going to, you know, uh, obstruct what you want to do. They're going to enhance what you want to do. So we got along great.
It also helps that I'm in London. So I would work throughout the day, send my stuff to Ron, end my day here. He would get to work, and I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be something to respond to. So it really, was was great. It's a really good way to work.
I'm thinking about some of the traditions and just some of the infrastructure surrounding a rehearsal process, performances. When I think about Gen Z, they aren't just younger, they dress differently. They have different relationships, maybe even aversions to certain traditions or certain norms that we have come up with. I wonder if that was a part of the process. Anything noticeable that had to change generally around rehearsal and performances to really fit a Gen Z perspective or sensibility.
Maybe it's a self-selecting thing because we were talking to people who were either activists or, in the case of rehearsal in Orlando, they're young performers really eager to get it right. Um, but Gen Z is not a monolith like any collection of people, and none of the young people that we worked with were shy of um, making commitments or doing the work or I mean, they're difficult to corral, especially from a distance. I mean, organizing a Zoom with everybody all together is a nightmare. Like those kinds of things are difficult, but they are not. They know this, so it's not like icky to say, but I really fell in love with all of them. They were fantastic to work with. I learned a lot from all of them. And I sometimes when I hear these tropes about how Gen Z, you know, doesn't comport themselves professionally, let's say, that was not my experience with these kids, these young
And
people.
you mentioned dress, and one of the things that we had to decide when we went down for the final rehearsals, what are they going to wear on stage? Because
Mhm.
we have six on-stage narrators that basically represent the 17 voices, the people that Portia interviewed that stayed the course the whole way through. So we talked with Eric, the conductor, and actually we were very fortunate to have Jamie Bernstein involved in the project. She directed the onstage narrators. So the four of us spent a lot of time with these kids, and we all decided dress normally. We don't want you to think you're going into this amazingly gorgeous and imposing concert hall. You have to be out of your own character. We want you to dress the way you normally do. And I think it really works for the project. We just again didn't want them to feel in any way awkward or that I'm doing something different because it's about their lives. And it's funny because even Eric, I mean he wore a jacket. I mean he could have gone clubbing afterwards. I mean you expect maybe tails or a tux or at least something a little semi-serious, and he just was riffing along with them and having a great time, and I think it put everyone at ease.
What did the two of you remember about the audience reaction at the premiere? Did the audience look different? Did it look the same? Were they
Oh,
excited?
100%. Well, we were very lucky in that the morning of the premiere, Orlando organized two visits to two huge or high schools in Orlando. And it was the Friday after the 2024 election. So we didn't know how many kids will be there, 20 something that we don't, but our sessions were packed. They were absolutely packed. And it was some of the most moving work I've done in this area. And basically, Ron and I just went in and did a quick song and dance about who we are and what we're doing, and let the young people who came, who I interviewed, who had come to Orlando specifically to talk to their peers about their own work and 17. And it was so powerful. I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. Just these kids are high school students, so they're a little bit younger still than the seven kids who had come down. I haven't really must stop calling them kids. They're young people. To me, they're kids, but and they had these wonderful, open, heartfelt exchanges about how the Florida students were feeling on this Friday after the election, and the 17 interview cohort were like, come see this piece. It's about all this. You got to come. And they really, here's a QR code. They were doing the hard sell, man. They were like, and a lot of them came. And they were, it changes the vibe of a place when it's full of young people. I mean, there were a lot of young people in that concert hall.
And
Other
not
than
only
that,
not only did they show up, but for the Q&A afterwards, they spoke up.
yeah, that's true.
And that to me was important. They weren't just there and they weren't just sitting and when it was over, they left. They stayed and they participated.
Mhm.
And so something went right that morning with these kids. And what I found really interesting was one of the young women that flew in for this, who was interviewed. I think she's from Pittsburgh, and she said to these kids, she said, "So, what are you doing for to be active in this for things you believe in?
Hmm.
What actions are you taking?" And these kids were sort of looking at her like, "Are we supposed to be doing something?" It was, and I wouldn't say she chastised them, but she pushed them. She said, if you believe in something, do something. And this is something that Portia and I couldn't possibly say to them without it coming across as kind of obnoxious.
Mhm.
But when she said it, they listened. And to
Ciara. Her
us,
name.
that's golden.
That is golden for sure. So following this incredibly successful premiere, what's the future of 17? Are there additional performances scheduled? What's going to happen?
Well, we just had the premiere. It was in November, and a lot of orchestras have said to me, "We're going to wait and see how it, what the reception is, and no, nobody wants to necessarily make a move until they see if something has been a success."
Sure.
We believe that it checked a lot of boxes, and we are looking forward. I've already heard from a couple of orchestras. We hope that it's not only going to be considered by top tier orchestras, but by orchestras in college, youth orchestras. There are some amazing youth orchestras. Imagine having a top youth orchestra where the concert master is 16 years old, and on stage you have young people talking about this. I mean, there are so many reasons why it should be done by really good youth orchestras. We want it to be accessible to a lot, and every performance, I think, is going to be different, which is kind of interesting. And it's not just because the conductor interprets the music differently, because if we have a talk back afterwards, or depending upon who is cast from the community to be on stage, it's going to have a totally different feel to it. So it's very exciting in that it's a living, breathing work in a way that maybe Portia and I didn't quite anticipate.
Hmm. Portia, I wonder how your work on 17 has informed the way that you engage future projects or approach the creative process generally.
Uh, well, it's interesting. It's been like deep in my head for the last many months. My husband is a recovering journalist, I should say, and we talk a lot about truth and what has happened to our accepted universal notions of what is demonstrably true. And I really felt, especially, I mean, after Bass Track was an introduction, but after 17, I have confirmation that in this area of verbatim text, there is a lot that we can do that, sits in a world that it's somebody's truth. And it is, when you listen to the stories of the young people who we interviewed for 17, this is their truth. And there's no one who can shake it from them. The things that they've experienced and seen and felt and done are undeniably, inarguably true. And I'm going to take that with me, and I'm going to do another verbatim piece after this. I'm going to do it very differently. It will be with different voices, and I'm going to explore that complicated notion of truth
I love that.
somehow. Yeah, wish me luck.
What about you, Ron? What are you taking from 17 into your next commission, your next project?
Well, I really fell in love with the idea of the spoken word and orchestra. There's not a lot out there when it comes to that. I think about Copland's Lincoln Portrait,
True.
or certainly it's not like Peter and the Wolf or Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. People have said to me, "Well, why don't they sing?" I've had people say, "Shouldn't they be singing this?" And I said, "No." I said, "I don't want to hear them sing. I want to hear them talk and talk the way they normally talk." Um, so I think whatever I do next, I've kind of now committed to doing a work that is more of a social impact project. And you're not going to, as I said, you're not going to hear the Ron Ramin violin concerto, but you might hear something about another issue that is near and dear to my heart. This piece began as something I wanted to do to talk about the about gun violence in schools. It became a slightly different project. It encompassed a lot of different issues, but it all was something that was important to me. I mean, when you're a father and when you have kids and you see what you want their future to be bright and to be hopeful. And so I wanted to do this. I wanted to make a some kind of a statement, and I know that I want to do that again. I just need to find that project that speaks to me, where I can put my heart into it.
It's interesting that Ron, that you mentioned, art and social impact, social justice. That's actually where I wanted to close our dialogue. A lot of people are pulling in quotes or just different perspectives from different artists of the past when it comes to art and social justice, social impact. And among them, my favorite is Nina Simone. I have a quote here. She said, "At this crucial time in our lives, when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. Young people, black and white, know this. That's why they're so involved in politics. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all." I feel like if she were alive today, she could say those very words today, and that they would
100%.
be as relevant. I'll start with you, Ron, and Portia. You can close us out. With that in mind, I wonder what message you have for the next generation regarding this intersection of art and politics. It's not necessarily something that conservatory students, learn in their composition lessons or in their instrumental lessons. I wonder, from your perspective, from your words, why is it important to really consider that intersection as a creator?
Well, let me start by not necessarily using my words, but you had mentioned David Hogg earlier, who now is a co-chair of the DNC, and he said something that we put on our website. And he said in 2022, he said, "I used to think art was dumb and had no real purpose, only to realize over the past 5 years, art and storytelling are the two most powerful things humanity has ever created." Now, I wish I had said that. Not that it was dumb. I never thought that it had no purpose.
Sure.
But the fact that it is so important, and Leonard Bernstein, his reaction on the assassination of JFK was, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, and more devotedly than ever before. I mean, you can say things using, through music that you can't necessarily just come out and say. You can do it through painting. Whether it's Picasso with Guernica, or I mean, look at that. You don't have to study the Spanish Civil War. You look at that painting and you say, "Oh my God, this is everything. All I need to know, I see in this painting." And I think that you have an opportunity to say something in your art, and it doesn't have to be music. For me, it's music, that says something that comes from deep inside you. And you are right that maybe this isn't taught in conservatories, and maybe it should. But it's about your passion, and it's about your commitment. And I just hope we see a lot of that in the coming years, because we're going to need it.
Portia,
Um,
final thoughts.
I think we will. Um, I don't know if this is just me, but I think really that all art is in some way political. Certainly, to make the choice to be an artist is in my view, a political thing, because you're making a commitment to do something radical, really, in the act of being an artist. It's not easy. There's no guarantees. It's hard to sustain, it's hard to make a living. All those things are true. And yet, it is a calling. And there's no doubt that there will be those people who become creative leaders who are, come from Gen Z. And uh, I just want to encourage them. I don't have any I can't imagine what it is that they're going to bring. I just want to say to anybody out there who might be listening to this podcast, or, I just put it out as karma to the universe, just do it. Just do it. Find your people, build your community, really think deeply about what you want to say and do it. There's no guarantee it will be a success. There's no guarantee. It might just touch one other person. But if you have that fire in you, it will need to find a way out. And I have every confidence that we are going to see really genuinely amazing things from the young people who are coming up today. There will be no stopping something.
An excerpt there from the Hungarian March from the Damnation of Faust. That's music by Hector Berlioz, the French composer. As I was thinking about when I was 17, this piece of music came to mind because it's one that I heard live at age 17, and it largely contributed to my initial love for orchestras and orchestral music and performance, all of that sort of thing. I'll say more on that here in a second, but first, huge thanks once again to Portia and Ron for joining me. If you'd like to learn more about 17, you can check out the link in the description. I think there are some future performances being scheduled with orchestras across the country, so you may even get an opportunity to experience it for yourself. So congrats to Portia, Ron, and everyone involved on some really, really, really great work. Okay, so again, for this week's Trilloquy, I found myself thinking about who I was at 17 and what pushed me into wanting to dedicate my life to orchestral music. I'll never forget it. A friend of mine named Nathaniel, shout out to Nate, wherever you are, he invited me to listen to his youth symphony rehearsal. It must have been our senior year of high school. Nathaniel played the cello, and I was, of course, already a bassoonist at that point, but as maybe I've talked about here before, my mom couldn't justify the fees associated with joining the Memphis Youth Symphony, so unfortunately, I never got to participate. I did get to listen, though, so in retrospect, I still hold lots of gratitude, even though I never got to play with an orchestra until I got to college. Anyway, that rehearsal that he invited me to way back when started with that Hungarian march that I just shared a little bit of with you. And something about the sound of it live in person really inspired me in that empty concert hall, listening to that rehearsal. I'd go on, of course, after high school to get degrees in bassoon and to play professionally with orchestras across the country. But then I fell out of love. The way American orchestral programming managed to completely decenter Black folks and really decenter Americans in general just turned me off. And then, so began my journey into radio and later podcasting and composer advancement and all the other stuff that I do. All of this to say that going to orchestra concerts is typically something I only do for work. If there's a premiere that I've initiated or a piece of new music, a living composer that is involved that I've supported in some way, I'm always there to support them. And then I'm usually gone at the intermission because that's when the canonical music is usually put on programs. But, this past week, I found myself at a concert that I had originally agreed to go to in support of the orchestra's activist intentions. Again, there was some intentionality behind it beyond me just wanting to hear some canonic music. But I ended up feeling a little cognitive dissonance because I actually enjoyed the European programming. The ensemble again was Protestra. Shout out to Protestra. I've been supporting their nonprofit for a while now, and I got a direct email inviting me to a benefit concert in support of folks in Gaza. So for all of the fundraisers and folks in development out there, those direct asks are a thing. They can be successful. So on the program, there were two new works that I very much enjoyed. I'm always here for the music by living composers, but they ended with Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. Now, originally, I said to myself, everyone plays that symphony. Why are we hearing it again? Surely there could be music by a Palestinian composer for us to platform. Surely there's something else on the program other than more European music. But I swallowed my baggage and stuck around for the entirety of the concert. Having worked in radio for a while, I do have experience with this piece of music, not only as a performer, I've performed Shostakovich's Fifth many times, but as a radio producer, it very much can be positioned as activist. I remember during the 2017 inauguration of Donald Trump, I actually aired Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony on WUOT as the as the inauguration was happening. So if people wanted to turn off the news radio because they didn't want to hear that and go over to classical, they were hearing Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. And if you don't know, he wrote this piece of music after Stalin called his previous work shit, basically. And of course, if Stalin didn't like you back in those days, death was likely around the corner. So this piece of music by Shostakovich, when it premiered, it not only pleased the regime and the powers that be, but it also pleased the people who stood against Stalin's regime. It's remembered as this piece of music that covertly resisted the Soviet Union while miraculously honoring the Soviet Union's protesters at the same time. It's something, this meeting in the middle that you don't see every day. Protestra played the piece of music extremely well. I mean, I can't say enough how much I enjoyed the performance. Shout out to Shanice, my homegirl, who was on principal horn. Shout out to my good homie Malachi, who was in the cello section, and just everyone else, the whole orchestra. It really was a great performance. So as I was sitting there enjoying it, I kept thinking about how I've been feeling about orchestras for the past 10 years or so. Here I was listening to a so-called canonical piece of music and having a good time. Was it the context of activism that kept me there? Knowing that the money that we spent on these tickets was, going to a cause that we consider good? Was it the sound of the orchestra itself? Maybe a return to who was once my favorite composer was why I couldn't bring myself to leave the concert. But, whatever it was, I was there. And it's got me thinking about what it means to not throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, when it comes to orchestras and this whole thing that we call classical music. Many of these 99% of these orchestral institutions have a very long way to go before I can justifiably call them anti-racist or anything like that. But that doesn't mean there isn't some good happening on these stages. When I apply this to my Buddhist practice, I think about the fact that, we all have a Buddha nature. We all have, innate ultimate good. As some of our writings say, even a thief steals so that he can feed his family. There's always some bit of compassion deep down inside all of our circumstances, even if on the surface they seem bad or supremacist, that sort of thing. And I'm trying to take this idea into my future engagement with orchestras. It's funny again how a piece of music that managed to please people on all sides of the Soviet political spectrum managed to please the diehard orchestral loyalists in the audience, folks like Dell who aren't versed in the repertoire, and even people like me who take pride in existing outside of those infrastructures. If there's a point or a moral to the story that I'm trying to get to, or if I can share, is that now is a great time for all of us to revisit our core values and our personal politics. The current president, who is all about Russia for some reason, is really damaging arts ecosystems. It's not hearsay or an opinion at this point. It's fact. And if you know, you know. If you're in the industry, if you're in the nonprofit world, you know. With such great forces working hard to tamp down resistance, we got to be the opposing force, and we can't be the opposing force divided. And moreover, we can't unite if we aren't interrogating the things that we have self-imposed on ourselves that keep us separated in the first place, things that keep us separated from people and communities with whom we'd otherwise find solidarity. Now, I don't want y'all to hear me saying that I'm back on the orchestra bandwagon. Y'all are still not going to see me taking auditions or, probably not even sitting on stage playing a Beethoven symphony, but you may see me performing with ensembles whose values align with mine, even if programming practices aren't what I would do, if programming practices aren't what they would be if I were in charge, and I have so much gratitude for the bassoon playing I've gotten to do lately. Shout out to Sugar Hill Salon. It's just interesting how actually performing is coming back into my life in a huge way. And as my life continues to expand and more opportunities come before me, I just want everyone to know that I haven't cooled off. I'm still, the classical agitator or whatever. I'm simply prioritizing solidarity everywhere that I can find it. If I can bring myself to re-engage orchestral literature from Europe, those of you who are challenged by other so-called genres can expand as well. See, that's the thing. Those of you who want to engage the youth have to have some perspective on what music, classical and otherwise, engages and excites younger people, just like Ron and Portia did. The place we want to be as a country, as a people, as a society, requires movement from all of us. It's not some people rising to the occasion. It's all of us moving to go to this new place. Not just activist movement either, but personal movement, human revolution, as we say in the Soka Gakkai. So just see where you can adjust your thoughts or your politics that may be the result of traumas or baggage, and see if you can reinvestigate those toward building solidarity. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's what I hope you'll do as well. Thanks so much once again for tuning in. I'll share more with y'all soon. Stay dangerous. Peace.